My name is Charlene Marto, and I am co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture. We are so thrilled to have with us tonight Dr. Devorah Heitner to talk about friends versus followers, friendship dynamics in the age of social media. Welcome, Devorah.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here with you, and I know that this is an amazing time to be thinking about these issues because we've all been through so much in these last couple of years around all of our relationships, including us as adults, educators, and parents. If you can drop into the chat, if you have your hands free at the moment and it's safe for you to do so, if you can drop into the chat the ages of your kids in your life, that would be really great for me to know. And I'll be considering friendship at all different ages, from young children to tweens to teens, but it would be helpful for me to know kind of who's with me right now. Okay, I see a bunch of different ages already: 13, 15, 11, 12, 13, 17, 14, 19, 6, 10, 15, and 23. Okay, so we know we have people already with kids ages 5 to 23 in their lives. Friendship is an incredibly important and wonderful thing in the lives of our kids. And the last few years, with the initial physical closure of schools and move to online school with COVID in 2020, and then the sort of evolution and change and the continued adaptation we've all had to do, and that we're still living with this pandemic, it has changed a lot of the ways our kids relate. It's changed what birthday parties look like. It's changed play dates. It's changed what dating looks like for high schoolers and college kids, right? All of this stuff, all of these kinds of relationships and peer experiences and kind of rites of passage have been affected by the pandemic. So I'm going to share my slides with you. Let me just go to share screen, and then I'm going to open this up. So you should be seeing this. And this also has information about how to get on my newsletter, but I'll talk to you about that later. You can text screens to 66866 if you're like, I need social media wellness information and digital wellness information in my inbox once a month. But let's talk about mental health and where these kids are. This is from a young woman that I interviewed for Growing Up in Public, Catlin Savato. She's an activist in Chicago, where I live, and she's in high school. And she wrote, I can't believe that these past 2 years have been real. I was 12 years old when the world flipped upside down. Now I'm in high school. I turn 15 in a couple months. I am supposed to do something, be something. I'm still stuck in my 12-year-old body. None of this feels real. I think we just need to take a moment and think about the profound stuff that happens in a person's life from like 12 to almost 15, or, 8 to 11, or 17 to 19, like wherever your kids are. And without feeling like total despair, because our kids can not just recover, but really do well. And we know even that kids can thrive after having difficult experiences. So I'm not here to wring hands over this, but I am here to say, like, this is profound. And when our kids say it's been profound, we do need to honor and recognize that, right? And I think something like what Catlin has written here in her Twitter shows us that even social media, which sometimes we think of as like not a very profound place, can be a place where kids are sharing really intimate, really thoughtful, really profound ideas and reflections on what's happening in their lives. So that's a really important thing. And just to back up for a second, as I've talked about in other talks, if any of you have seen me speak in this series or other places before, when we think about our kids and tech, a lot of us wring our hands over what our kids doing on Twitter, but we need to remember that kids have things to teach us. So we want to be mentoring our young people more than just monitoring, right? We're not here to catch our kids doing the wrong things with tech. We want to teach them how to get it right, how to move forward from mistakes. And sometimes also mentoring can be learning from them. Like when I look at this tweet from Catlin Savato, who again, it was 14 when she wrote these really profound words and has said and done a lot of other things that I find really influential and thought-provoking, I can learn from her. And part of mentoring can also be learning from our kids and letting them teach us, whether it's how to do something on TikTok or Discord, how to play a video game that they love, right? And so that's a theme I'm going to continue to come back to, is what does mentoring look like? And we do have a lot of relationship and friendship experience that we can bring to our kids, right? So if we see them kind of struggling with relationships and friendships, we can help them. And even though that's playing out in these new spaces like Discord, TikTok, Instagram that we didn't have as kids, Snapchat, group text, etc., cloud-based gaming, Roblox, Minecraft, right? All these places where our kids are relating that we didn't grow up with. the issues that they're having are similar or the same, right? The developmental urges and the connections and the ways kids come together or fall apart are very much the same. They're just happening in a different space. And I think that's really important for us as parents to recognize that our kids are both in a new place, but they're not totally different than we were. The pandemic is maybe different than what we experienced unless you grew up and under some kind of lockdown, right? But it's important to recognize that the urges, again, and the natural kind of inclinations of kids and the struggles they have relating are very much developmental and part of experiences that we can probably relate to. The things that bring kids together, you know, laughing at a shared story, laughing at a meme together, right? If you came in and talked about The Simpsons with your friends and your kids are talking about memes with their friends, they're using the culture to find common ground. And right now, a lot of that common ground for many kids is going to be YouTube, it's going to be video games, it's going to be TikTok. And the older your kids are, the more true that is. Now, one thing that's also true is that unlike if you grew up like me, if you're old like me and you grew up even like pre-cable, and you only had broadcast, there was like a more limited amount of culture that you could have shared commonality with. Somehow my weird nerdy family managed to make me the kid that like did go to second grade and not know who Michael Jackson was. So, I mean, I do think that you could still be the weird kid that didn't know, but there was like a lot of more shared culture and a smaller menu of TV shows, for example. And so there was maybe more in common, but even so, the kids will find, like little kids in preschool and the early years of elementary school have certain characters from both books and television that may be pretty universal. As kids get older, memes, TikTok videos, and certain kinds of cultural trends are ways that they come together. So whether or not we like these trends is another question. And we can absolutely, as parents and educators, be critical of some of the content kids are seeing and look at some of it, you know, in that way. But understanding the ways it brings kids together may help us be a little bit more sympathetic to some of it. All right, so I want to talk about some issues that kind of frame our kids' friendships and the whole idea of friendship right now. So our kids' relationships are mediated through things like cloud-based gaming, texting, comments on social media for older kids, group texting. Our kids are also contending with having a reputation, whether it's because we shared about them, which I'll talk about just a little bit tonight, but I've been thinking about for years. And again, for some of you who've been around for a while and have seen me speak before, you know, I'm going to say that we need to ask our kids permission before we share about them. And that's an important way we can start the conversation at home about reputation. But reputation also affects their relationships with peers. What kids post may be the first thing other kids know about them. You know, before I've asked many groups of middle schoolers when I go out to schools, hey, do you ever think something different about someone when you meet them after you've seen posts about that they've shared? And many kids will say, absolutely, I've met someone who was so different than what they were kind of trying to imply about themselves, which is really interesting, something to talk to kids about. Another issue that I want to talk with you all about tonight is self-esteem. When I was in middle school, I had 3 friends, but I didn't have social media. So it wasn't like walking around with a t-shirt with a number of 3 on it. It wasn't like I was like, hey, I'm Devora. I've got 3 friends. That's 3. It's the magic number, right? It was like, I had these 3 friends. They were my friends. I'm still friends with those people. So I'm going to say that the quality of those relationships was high. The quantity was not high. And because I didn't have social media, I didn't have to think about the quantity. I had enough people to sit with at lunch, which was, of course, like the thing that we worried about and the thing that kids still stress over, although some kids have had assigned seating with the pandemic, and that may actually be a relief in some ways for some kids. But self-esteem is tricky now with technology because you can quantify your YouTube following, you can quantify the number of Snapchat streaks you've got going on. There's a lot of numbers in this game. And even as an adult, it is a head trip and a half, right? Like, you know, I have to think about like, okay, what am I going to do about Twitter? You know, am I going to like feel weird about Twitter now? That's where I have the big numbers. You know, can I walk away from that? And big numbers, by the way, for me is not a lot, but it's still like, you know, you build up these social media followings and your publisher, your friends, or whoever you are, whatever you do professionally, you might feel like this is really important. But when push comes to shove, when I had COVID in March, was it my Twitter followers or my Instagram followers who were outside my house with chicken soup? It was not. It was my friends and family That's right. So we need to be able to help kids understand friends versus followers. I'm going to keep coming back to that tonight. That's the title of the talk, but it's so important for kids to understand and not tie their self-esteem to having a large number of followers, to their fame, their clout, their influence, all the things that kids can get very caught up in. At the same time, we don't want to harsh on them and be super critical if they say, I want to be a streamer, I want to have 1 million followers. We want to understand where that impulse to fame comes from. But it's very important that we don't, kind of just uncritically notice that our kids are chasing followers without talking to them about it. But we also, again, don't want to like rain on their parade about it. So I'm going to get into that some more, but just know that that number, once your kid goes on social or has a YouTube channel or has a TikTok or has anything where you can quantify the comments, the engagement, the likes, or the number of followers, for most people, that is a little bit of a weird head trip. And then finally, boundaries. I mentioned earlier that parents, I strongly recommend that parents ask their kids before they post and share about them, and they think hard about who those posts are serving and what they're really for. And, before we went live, the organizers who both have adorable grandchildren, I know Charlene does, was talking about, be keeping those images close. What does it look like to keep those images close? And are there even ways to enjoy images within the family without sharing them widely? That's a boundary. Deciding who to give your phone number to is a boundary. Kids that I interviewed for Growing Up in Public had like very complex rubrics for how they decided who to give a phone number to versus who to direct message on Instagram or who to message on Snapchat. These are boundaries. So when we say kids don't care about privacy, kids don't have boundaries, kids actually have tremendously complex thoughts about all of this stuff, but they also might go on Twitter and do what Catlin did and share something very intimate that we might not share in that space. So I think it's important to understand that kids do have boundaries, but they might be different than our boundaries. And again, I'll get into some of that as we go. All right. So I talked about mentoring, not just monitoring. There are ways that tech can help kids come together, ways that tech can even help siblings get along. If you have a kid over for the first time, you may find that your kid gravitates toward like a video game or something, because that can be a really good way for kids to connect who maybe haven't played together before, right? So video games, if you know the same game or you're learning the same game, you're kind of in the same space. It's an equalizer. There's a lot of forgiveness in games. If your avatar dies, you can pick up and start on that level again. And so there's a lot of reasons that, especially early in friendships or when kids are more tentative, that may be an easier place for them to go. One thing that we can do to help kids who maybe have been gaming through the pandemic and we want to see them expand their repertoire of playing with other kids in other ways is helping them identify things that are even adjacent to some of their interests. I have a kid who really loves battle games, like kind of more old school, like more like medieval battle games. Not surprisingly, he's also into tabletop role-playing games. So Dungeons and Dragons, right? But also it turns out that the war games, like the classic Axis and Allies and Risk, have been really fun. So there are ways that we can turn that interest into something that also involves, a board game or also involves some face-to-face time. They have also been known in our neighborhood to go out with what is it, like water guns in the summer. So I mean, if you're not opposed to that kind of play and you want your kid to go outside, a lot of people like things like Pokemon Go or geocaching to get their kids outside as well. So, if you can use tech to spark something that takes kids either outside or into a board game environment or into just another space, you are helping them expand their repertoire. So I'm here to say, I think gaming can be very positive for our kids' relationships and a really nice grounding, but I absolutely understand if you have a kid who's been doing almost nothing but gaming for the last 3 years, why you might be feeling like you want your kid to like broaden out. And these are some things you can look at. You can certainly also look at getting some reading material that's game adjacent, especially again, if the games have revealed certain interests. Same thing with, YouTube or TikTok. Like if your kid is really hung up on a certain genre of dance on TikTok or a certain kind of music or cooking shows on YouTube, let's get some kid cookbooks and teen cookbooks and get them cooking, or just regular cookbooks if you've got a high schooler, right? Get your kid cooking. I want to see them, I want to see some results from those baking shows. Don't just watch 50 how to make a souffle, how to make cupcakes videos. Like let's make dinner. I want to talk a little bit about about conflict that can come up, including navigating distractions, right? How do we deal with when we're trying to do homework and friends are trying to write to us, group texting popping off, right? There's a lot to deal with when we're in an online connected environment, and kids can be really overwhelmed by it. One reason that kids don't like to turn off their phones and devices when they're doing other things like homework is that they actually feel really worried about letting other kids down. I've had even young kids tell me they have to be in the Minecraft server after school, or they have to show up to Roblox, or their friends will be disappointed, mad at them. Older kids who are like, I must be at the group text, or I must show up and like these kids' photos. So one thing we can do is help our kids navigate distraction by letting friends know when they are and are not available. And having that boundary with friends, like saying to friends, you know, I can't be in Minecraft right after school, I've got to do my homework first, or letting friends know like, hey, I can't be in the group text after, you know, a certain amount of time because my mean parents make me go to bed, or whatever it is actually really helpful. And then as people get older, I found that teenagers, whether they're in their friend groups or dating or other things, are also pretty good about calling each other out for rude phone behavior. So you may have been called out by your own teenager for this, where, you know, like if I'm distracted talking with my kid, or I'm trying to sit down to watch a TV show with him, and I'm trying to finish up some email as the opening credits are rolling, and he's like, didn't you write a book, Mom, where you said people shouldn't double screen? And I'm like, okay, I guess I have to put it away. I'm busted, right? So I think that's so important to help kids navigate distraction, and also help them understand the relationship implications. Like, hey, if your one friend is over and your other friend is texting, and you're looking at the texts in an ongoing way, like that's not going to work. That's going to be really rude to the person who's there, and they're going to feel hurt and let down. And if your friend is doing that to you, you can say something. And again, actually what I'm seeing is teenagers often are a little more direct. Sometimes like, dude, put your phone away. Whereas adults, I think sometimes I'm out to brunch with someone and I want to be like, dude, put your phone away. And I kind of like the words stick in my mouth and I feel like I'm being a little too assertive. But I think we could learn something actually from teenagers on this one. We do want to understand kids' digital world. And for those of you who have kids who are newer to phone use and connecting with friends, you know that texting is a bigger deal than we realize. And for those of you who are not there yet, let me say it again. Texting is a bigger deal than we realize. We need to teach kids texting etiquette, because often we get so hung up on like, oh my gosh, TikTok, oh my gosh, gaming. We don't even think about texting as like a skill that we need to teach. But texting 100% is like a space that we need to help kids get better at. Group texting is a place where a lot of things can get pretty sour pretty fast between friend groups and also larger peer groups. It's very, very common for things to happen like, let's all restart this group text with the soccer team, but without Shauna. Let's, you know, we'll all use this space to share memes, and some of us will try to one up each other until we share memes that are actually really inappropriate. Maybe we're gonna end up talking about a kid that's not on the group text, but someone will screenshot it and show it to him, right? These are not like exotic examples. These are like every school, every community kind of examples. And so even before our kids are in the sort of world of group text, which is often like late elementary or into middle school, we want to kind of troubleshoot and talk about what would you do if, what can you do when, you know, these are just tough things that come up. The good news is by high school, most kids don't want to group text massively. They might group text with the kids on the debate team or with a certain friend group. A lot of times kids also do move to social media in high school and DM there. I talked with a lot of high school kids who have what they call spam accounts now. A few years ago on Instagram, people used to call it Finsta. Before you panic, parents whose kids might have two accounts, like if you see that they're not posting very much on their main account, that doesn't necessarily mean your kid is doing anything secretly bad. They may just have a small friend group that they want to let their hair down with, that they might be funnier with, that they might be more open with, that they don't feel like they have to sort of keep up appearances for. Whereas on their main account, especially in a space like Instagram, they might want to keep things a little, you know, more buttoned up. So having that understanding of privacy doesn't mean your kid is like up to no good. It actually reflects an understanding of the way social media works, and that your main account is like where just anyone can find you, or a lot of people can find you, and quote unquote your grandma can see, right? And your, you know, your spam account with your 3 friends might be where you kids call it, you know what, posting all day. And it's a way of just kind of staying in touch. Like I might use, I don't really have a group text that I'm as active on as I think teenagers are sometimes with their spam accounts, but I do have a few group texts with close friends that have a different tone and a different quality to them. And we're kind of sharing news of the world. We're sharing articles with each other. We're sharing little videos sometimes. And it is a very different kind of communication than I would put up on my main LinkedIn or my Twitter, right? That are seen by people who I don't even know, who are professional colleagues. So I think the fact that kids understand that different spaces call for different interactions is important. We can remind them, and we should remind them, that anything can be seen by anyone sometimes, right? Your 3-person spam account could be seen by somebody's dad, right? Or could be, your friend could leave their phone on the bus or at school. There's all, and if something really bad happens, heaven forbid, like it could be like on the legal record. So it's really important to know that you shouldn't share anything there, that you would be devastated if it became public. But it's also okay to understand those different levels of sharing. When I talk to kids, I ask them, why is it so easy to get in a fight with somebody when you're texting? And this could even be like kids who don't have phones yet, and they're texting in the Google Classroom or the learning management system. Kids can be texting on Roblox and cloud-based gaming, right? So even little kids, young kids who are like really just a few years into reading and writing and keyboarding are texting, which imagine the possibilities for misunderstanding. But when I ask kids, why is it so easy to get misunderstood when you text, they're like very clear. They're like, you don't have face expression, you don't have tone of voice, you don't hear what the other person's dealing with in the background. So there's a lot you don't know about sort of what you're speaking into. Whereas if you walk up to somebody and you can see that they're very upset, maybe you don't share your news right away. You ask them how they're doing first. But with texting, we're kind of dropping in from the sky and we don't know what's going on with people. So it's very easy for things to go wrong. And one of the biggest pieces of advice that I have that parents can share and mentor their kids on, whether your kid is 17 or 11, is if you're texting someone and it's not going well, try to slow it down and ideally see if you can meet face-to-face to work it out. Because once things get bad in a texting situation, and I'm talking even people really well, like with my husband, if things get tricky in a texting situation, that's when I call, right? Because we're not getting each other. And a good clue for both teens and tweens and even adults is, am I holding my phone real tight? Am I hitting the keyboard hard? Am I holding my breath? These are all physiological cues that our brain is going into kind of a fight or flight mode that may not be ideal for communicating. Another thing we don't want to do is take a screenshot of somebody else's text and show it around to be like, I'm the rightest and they're the wrongest, right? We don't want to do that. And that is something that unfortunately kids will do. We don't want to encourage that. Again, I'm not talking about like if you need to document harassment or bullying, like screenshot away, but I'm talking about like your kid, said something and someone else said something and they're like, I'm going to screenshot this to show it around, right? We don't want to take other people's texts out of context because we wouldn't want our texts to be taken out of context. So it is really important that we work with our kids on that and make sure that they understand that we don't want to just focus on being the rightest or the wrongest, and recruiting other people to our conflicts is not a good idea, because you might be able to actually work it out with your friend. But if you've got the whole 8th grade involved or the whole 5th grade involved, right, it's going to be a lot harder to work it out. Another thing we don't want to do is blow up somebody else's phone by texting them a zillion times. And so I always remind kids that there's another person on the other end of the screen, and that person might be taking a shower or eating dinner or charging their phone in another room or hanging out with their parents. There's a million reasons, right, that someone wouldn't be answering their phone, and most of them are not, they hate you now. So it's really good not to keep texting and texting. And a lot of kids will mash on their phones really hard when it's you. They're trying to text you like, Mom, where's my, or Dad, or when are you coming home? But it's not like, because I'm bleeding. It's like, because are you bringing me my chips that I like, right? I mean, obviously we would want our kids to do anything they could to reach us in an emergency. But when my phone blows up from my kid, it is generally not an emergency unless you count, I can't find the clicker or the Nutella as like an emergency, which I don't, for the record. This is an app that sixth graders I worked with years ago invented to stop people from texting you a million times. And we probably all know at least one adult that we like want to get this app for. Okay, so these are some things we can teach kids to do if they are in a conflict with a friend. We want to try to work it out face to face. We might want to have clarity through boundaries. Maybe your best friend or your new sweetie is texting you all the time and blowing up your phone. Maybe you can say like, hey, please don't text me during the school day so much. It's like really distracting. Or, if your kid is younger and feels like using you as an excuse, you could say something like, my parents get really upset when I get texts late at night. You can also, take their phones at night or turn them off, but it's important to share your boundaries because that can really help relationships and prevent misunderstandings, right? Before a couple breaks up because one person is expecting 900 texts a day and one person is thinking more like 9 would be good, maybe they can talk about that. And even with friends, like saying like, please don't add me to that group text. I just don't want my phone blowing up all day, right? And consent is so important. So like if somebody goes up to your kid and says, oh, like, I really like your friend Nadia, can I have her number? I want to invite her to my birthday. What you have to do is obtain permission. Like, don't give Nadia's phone number to, this new person until you ask Nadia if it's okay, right? And this is what we do even with email introductions, right? Like double consent. I always do double opt-in consent. We don't just give people's information away. We also don't share people's pictures without permission. If someone's saying, no, don't take my picture, we don't take their picture. We certainly don't post a picture of someone who has said, please don't post this. Right. And your kid doesn't even have to have a reason. By asking at home for permission, we're setting our kids up for successful boundaries. Like you might think there's nothing you could post that would be embarrassing. Hundreds of kids I've interviewed would say you're wrong and you can embarrass your kids, but you might feel like you can't possibly embarrass them. You wouldn't do that. But even if you wouldn't, and truly, even if there's nothing objectionable about your post for them, asking permission still sets them up like, oh, this is a cultural norm, just like, saying God bless you when you sneeze or whatever you like to say in your family, or, washing your hands before you eat. Like, these are just things you do. Before you post someone's picture to the internet, you ask permission, right? And so setting that up as a norm is really, really helpful for them. So they know they can say no. And so they know to ask before they share. Our kids are growing up in a very visual culture. They're more aware of their appearance from a younger age. However, they identify in the spectrum of gender. There are specific pressures, definitely, for sure, on girls and female identified kids, but there are pressures really on everyone at this point around body image, around self-presentation, even the pressure to like know and share your gender identity, your sexuality. All of that is like a lot to deal with. And we didn't have to deal with it, right? Like if I had a weird hair day, I probably wasn't photographed at school that day because we only got photographed once a year. My parents didn't even always buy those pictures. They certainly didn't take pictures every time we hung out as a family because we weren't walking around, with one of these things all the time, right? So we need to help our kids reduce that appearance pressure. And we can do that from a younger age. Some of the folks, some of the body image and eating disorder prevention specialists that I talked to in writing Growing Up in Public told me that actually, once our kids are in the tween years, like pre-puberty into puberty and beyond, it may be better to take fewer full body photos of them, especially and share them. So if you're at the pool, maybe you take a shoulders up photograph versus a full body photo, because we don't want to provide our kids so many photos to kind of study and compare, like, how does my body look here? How does my body look there? Now, for some kids, this is not going to be a huge issue. So I don't want to suggest that all kids are having tremendous body image concerns. I know after the Instagram hearings in 2021, when Frances Haugen kind of blew the whistle on that internal research, a lot of us were like, oh no. But the fact is many kids are on social media and body image does not become a preoccupation. However, if you think your kid is getting preoccupied, if you think your kid is at risk, then definitely they may need to dial back their time on social media. It may be important for them to curate their social media so that the algorithm sends them more body positive stuff. It may be important for them to only follow close friends and not really look at the sort of For You page on TikTok or the, sort of open algorithm stuff on Instagram. Some of the research that even that research was kind of wacky. You can ask me about it in the questions. It's a question and answer. It's not the be all and end all definitive research for sure. But I will say that, some kids found that Snapchat was a little less stressful. And a lot of parents are like, oh, Snapchat, that's where kids go to do naughty things because the images disappear. And kids were actually saying, at least to the meta researchers, that Maybe Snapchat's less stressful because the images disappear, among other things. There's like less appearance pressure. So things are not always what we think they are. So it's important to understand with our kids, like what is their actual lived experience. If your kid is experiencing a lot of appearance pressure, definitely that would be something I would address sooner versus later. Some concern and interest in appearance is developmentally typical though. Wanting to look cute, wanting to have your hair look nice, wanting to have style and fun clothes is a thing for many, many kids, whether it's middle school, high school, or beyond. So that wouldn't concern me. I'm talking about kids who are like trying to use apps to really change their appearance, and not in a funny way, but in a, change their appearance way. Or kids who are really getting hung up on the likes in a way that's really derailing them from life. Again, some interest in looking cute and having people think you're cute is very, very typical part of adolescence for many, and that in and of itself wouldn't concern me. I want to come back to, remember I talked about how I had 3 friends and that I wasn't walking around with that number. Your kid, if they're on any social accounts with a public number of followers, probably knows how many followers they have. Even the kids I interviewed who were like, I don't really know how many followers I have, I think around 37, knew how many followers they have. Like, and I could say the same thing, like, I don't know how many Amazon reviews, Screenwise has, I think it's around 132, So, I mean, I think it's really important to say, like, most of us, if we're human, have a tendency to want to quantify that kind of feedback. And we're going to probably be checking it at least a little bit. And even if your kid has a good sense of humor about it, and is basically fine, which is a lot of kids that I talk to. I was not super worried about most kids that I talk to. It's important to have that sense of humor and that distance, to recognize the ways that social comparison can be insidious, that people are kind of inherently being socially promotional. One person was like, oh, well, my teenager's just on there for the attention. I was like, yeah. Like, is anyone on social media not for the attention? Like, what in the heck else is the economy of social media? That is what it is for. So it's not like your kid has some kind of like weakness that they want attention, affirmation, and likes. We all want that. And so the challenge is, does it, again, become a problem for your kid, or is it something that fits into their life? It may sound contradictory, but more chores at home, more usefulness in the community, being actually a useful person is better for your self-esteem. I know, I was gonna say shoveling your neighbor's driveway, but I know a lot of you live in a place with not a lot of snow, but helping your neighbor in some way, doing things in the community, right? Like all of these things you can do for others and for the family, walking your dog, emptying the dishwasher, getting dinner on the table, caring for a younger sibling, are honestly better for your self-esteem than like getting likes on Instagram, doing things that you need to do and that help others, supporting the community. Again, so important. So we want our kids to balance out their social media time with actually usefully doing things. Gaming is an interesting place for friend groups to hang out. It's also a lot more accessible and diverse than it used to be, in that there's many spaces for, all genders, all different kinds of interests. You could have a kid who would never play a shooter game, but they would play, the adopting animals game on Roblox. So there's really, truly, if your kid likes games at all or might like games, there is probably something for them. There are, games like Sims that are just about like building a community and organizing your life. That said, you may feel more or less drawn into gaming, but one of the things you want to attend to is like, how are these relationships working out? Does my kid know how to get out of a sticky situation? If someone in Roblox or Fortnite starts using nasty language or hate speech, does my kid know how to get out of it? If my kid has a friend who gets too aggressive when they game, does my kid have strategies to deal with it? If my kid feels like the other friends only want to game and they want to do something else, can we work with them on like practicing how we can do that? Or can we even be the heavy when those friends come over and be like, okay, I'm throwing you out of the house, go get some pizza, right? Or whatever it is. How can we help our kids in that way? I definitely have had experiences where my kids friends have come over with like a backpack full of gaming stuff. And I've been like, okay, I'm glad you came prepared, but before you do that, I'm like suggested another activity. So don't feel afraid to intervene and try some things. And yeah. I want to talk a little bit about YouTube and TikTok, and then we can move pretty quickly to the Q&A so we have enough time, since I know we have a lot of people with us tonight and a lot of people may have questions. So TikTok and YouTube are both kind of the Wild West of the internet, maybe even more so than social media. It's hard to say, like more so than maybe Instagram or Snapchat or Discord is also kind of Wild Westy. We'll get there in a second. But all of these apps are places where sometimes friends hang out. What you want to see is what kinds of experiences is your kid having? Is your kid going from TikTok to like Reddit and Quora and like not nice social forums? Or are they sharing TikToks with friends and even making some TikToks with friends and having a good time with it? Obviously, depending on your kid's age, you may not be comfortable with them using TikTok at all. Same thing with YouTube. Like certainly if they want a channel, I would want to have some ground rules about that and for them to be above a certain age and maybe to be making them in a public space in your home. You can think about whether they should have comments turned on or off with YouTube. I don't think comments off is even an option with TikTok. I don't think that that's allowed, but someone can intervene in the chat if that is possible. I don't think you can have a comments free TikTok. So what happens then if you can't have it without comments is, of course, you're vulnerable to people saying random, sometimes not very nice things. I will say that direct messages is another place, and especially a lot of girl identified kids told me that they got really nasty propositions from strangers on Instagram, like on the regular. That was one of the things that I learned interviewing teenagers, was like, it was normal for some of these young women to get, like sugar daddy requests and like really gross propositions, like pretty often. So that's something to think about too, and something to warn kids about, frankly, and just let them know, like, hey, if that happens, you can block those people, etc. Discord is another space where kids are hanging out. And I interviewed a kid for Growing Up in Public who was an 8th grader who was moderating a Girl Talk Discord. Discord started out as a place for gamers to talk to each other during the game, but has become kind of like an interfiled, almost like the old chat rooms. It's a place where you can go and kind of be with people who share similar interests, and you can talk to them, in chat in different ways. And the girl chat Discord she was on was actually a Schitt's Creek Discord, right? So it's technically like a fan site about a show, a TV show, but then the girl chat was sort of within that. And she was fielding all kinds of things from like mental health issues, people talking about things like suicide and self-harm, to one of her roles as a moderator was booting people out if they didn't respect the rules of the girl chat server. So that's pretty heavy for a 13-year-old. And in many ways I was like, this is amazing leadership. Oh my goodness. And then I was like, do her parents know that she's a moderator on this Discord? What is the mental health support that she has available to her, given that she's dealing with all of these things? And what are her boundaries, like an understanding of her responsibility, given that there may be situations that are really, any situation that someone shares online, like it's completely beyond your control. You don't even know who they are necessarily. So how can you help them? So, and she was very comfortable telling me that she referred people to hotlines and that kind of thing. But I, as a parent and as a person who works with young people, it raised a lot of questions for me. And I also was very impressed again with her leadership. So there's a lot to think about in terms of the ways our kids are relating in these spaces. You definitely want to know more than just my kid is on TikTok or my kid is on YouTube. You want to know, where are they on TikTok or YouTube? Where are they on Discord? What is their role in this space? Are they sharing content, or are they just looking at content? Is the content they're experiencing positive? Another issue is that sometimes kids can get very invested in like parasocial relationships. Like if they have a YouTuber they're obsessed with, is that interfering with their ability to make friends in real life? Right. And so it's important to kind of look and balance that out. If you have access to talking to their school counselor or someone like that, especially if you know your kid is kind of in between friend groups or going through a transition where maybe they're having a harder time connecting, that might be something that they can help with at school if they know that that's a concern. I've seen some very successful like friend matchmaking happen in schools. And I also think that's a good time to look at what else in the community. Can your kid do scouting? Can they do a religious youth group? Can they do, some kind of volunteerism or a boys club or girls club? Like what can they do? Especially something that's kind of friend oriented, right? Like my kid does a lot of activities. Some are more friend oriented than others. Like I love that he does martial arts, but it's not very chatty, at least at his studio. Now there may be studios that do a lot more socially where that would be a place to like meet other kids. In our case, like religious school youth group has been like a friend making space, and Dungeons and Dragons Club at the library has been a great place to make friends. So in every community, there are places that are kind of great options. Actually, a lot of great library programs in many communities are really good places for kids to make friends outside of school. And sometimes that's less pressure because the friends at school, you're with them all day and that can be hard. So I do think we want to balance out our kids' kind of online socializing with some opportunities for in-person. That said, this is also a really important space. And one of the things I really learned writing growing up in public is that the kids are redefining the boundaries of what's okay to share, whether that's about neurodiversity, gender identity, LGBTQ plus identities. It's so important to understand that kids are finding a lot of common ground in places like Discord. And so I wouldn't discount that if that's a source of community and and support for kids. I wouldn't discount that. I just don't want that to be the only place where they have that. So here's a Discord where people are talking about LGBT plus, as well as ASD, ADHD, depression, anxiety. So there's a lot of identities and conversations going on here. Again, if my kid identified in one of these ways, I wouldn't want this to be the only space they could go. I think online affinity spaces can be helpful. The other warning or concern, I guess, I would have about mental health Discord or mental health spaces on the internet is some of them can be kind of encouraging in a negative way. So I definitely want to talk with, if your child is in therapy or getting other support, talk with their therapist and them about where they're spending time and is it a supportive environment. All right, I want to move to Q&A because I know we've got a lot of people here and it's important to get to some questions. And then there's always more I can share if nobody has questions. And I also want to just say, again, if you want to text the word screens to 66866, you can share your email with me and I will send you useful, informative stuff about social and emotional wellness and tech about once a month. And then you'll also hear about my book when it comes out in August next year, which feels like a long time away. So in the meantime, I'll be sharing stuff like my last note was about sleep. I have hopefully very useful things to say. And I'm going to go to Q&A. Okay. Let's see. Is this, should I just start with the top, Charlene?
No, I'm going to give you questions, Devorah.
Perfect.
Well, thank you so much. My goodness, what a lot of amazing information, Dr. Heitner. I just want to say, parents, that we have been working with, again, Dr. Heitner for many years. She's always ahead of the curve. So you're really getting kind of the hot off the press information about what our kids are doing online, how friendships are impacted. So I just really appreciate having you and all the amazing information you shared today. Let's start with one that we have been answering for many years. I know you have some input because I've used your advice. Do you recommend that parents use monitoring software? Tell us what happens if you find something and you haven't told your kid.
Well, okay. So if you're going to use monitoring software, I would disclose it to your kid and I would just recognize that it's not going to solve everything because if you're trying to prevent your kid from seeing porn, nothing is going to prevent a kid from sitting down next to your kid on the school bus, shoving their phone in your kid's face and being like, look at this, it's so sick. Which is literally what happens to, I can't tell you how many kids, right? So even if your kid isn't looking for it, some other kid might be like, check this out. So you need to have conversations with them about pornography. You need to have conversations with them about extreme violence. You need to have conversations with them about every kind of content. And all of those things are available in YouTube, TikTok, even Pinterest, right? There's no place on the internet where there's nothing that's gross. So it's really important that we talk to kids about this stuff and make it really, really clear and really really help them understand what we're expecting and let them know what we're looking for. If we are going to monitor, I would say looking at it with them is better than using tech to monitor, sitting down with a new phone user every week to say, hey, let's look at the group chat together a little bit. I want to see how it's going and letting them know what you're looking for. I want to see how you and your friends are talking to each other. Sometimes when my kid was learning, I would look at his phone with him and say, yeah, it seems like you're trying to make plans here, but nobody's talking about a date or a time. So I'm not always talking about getting all up in their business, but just helping them learn some skills. You're saying you want to hang out, But one thing you could do is say, like, do you want to hang out on Sunday? Like you could like just like narrow it down and like work toward an actual plan. And that honestly is still a work in progress for my 8th grader. And I think that's like an example a little bit of like some pandemic lag, like where the world stopped when he was in 5th grade. He was out of school for 18 months. His whole cohort, I would say, is a little has some deficiencies, at least what I see is like in plan making. So I'm not out to like catch him like saying stuff that's like bad or talking about me. And I asked him if I could look at his phone, but he said like, I'm making plans, but it's not working. And I was like, can I look at how that, and then I was like, okay, so let's look at this. And you see how like nobody's mentioning a date or a time. So that's helpful. And we're talking about it. What you don't want to do is relive middle school or high school with your kid and read everything, because then you're painting yourself in a corner. What are you going to do if you're covertly monitoring your kid and you see something and you then can't talk to them about it? And the other thing that's also tricky is I believe it can give parents a false sense that they know what's going on. And I think it's better to be talking to kids and really observing, how is your kid doing? Are they coming home angry? Are they coming home sad? Are they sleeping? Like those are better indicators of your kid's mental health and trying to like catch what's going on the group text or the social posts.
Thank you. Great answer. So Devorah, this is something you've touched on, but let's try the question. Parent asks, what are the signs I should look out for to know or suspect that my child has a problem with social media or is suffering because of social media activity?
That's a great question. And of course, there's like a meter of suffering. Like we all suffer a little bit on social media, I think, because of the social comparisons. But if the pleasures of it and the fun of it are outweighing the suffering, like for me, the pleasure of being able to connect with people I don't know and learn from them outweighs the feeling of like, wait, why don't I have a MacArthur? All my Facebook friends got a MacArthur. Like, what am I doing wrong? Those kinds of things. Like, I think it's really important to look at. So if it's a little bit of suffering, if your kid every once in a while is a little bit blue because of something they see, but most of the time seems to be getting pleasure out of it, then that doesn't feel like out of control suffering. If they're following some kids that make them feel really bad, if they had a bad breakup with a friend or a romantic partner and they're tracking that person and obsessing, if they're checking their grading apps too much, I know that's not social media, but like anything like that and it's stressing them out, those are all things I would try to reduce their time on social and really let them know what you see. Or again, if they have access to a therapist or you're working with somebody, like if your kid's going through a mental health issue, that might be better brought up by someone else. If you are in that situation, if you have someone outside the family, because it is really hard as a parent to be like, I can see this is making you feel bad. And we know, like, especially with our kids' friendships, we can also let them learn from challenges. Like we may see friends that we don't feel like treat our children very well, for example. But again, outside of like actual abuse and harm, it's often better and more appropriate to let our kid decide to distance themselves from that friend over time themselves than to say, I hate this friend, I hate the way she talks to you, blah, 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 because that then becomes a fight with you and it takes away their kind of power in the situation. So it's very painful to watch a kid, watch other people and feel excluded. Kids tell me the best things to do in those situations are to put away your phone, hang out with your parents, let the parents be the B plan, hang out with your pets, eat your favorite snack, watch your favorite show. That's definitely a time to put away your phone. Do not watch that slumber party or that prom that you're not going to if you're not like that, put it away. I was having those feelings on Halloween for various reasons this year, and I was like, I'm putting it away. Okay.
And parents, as Devorah says, we should never feel bad about being plan B, right, Devorah?
Absolutely. If it was any other relationship, it wouldn't be so cool. But if it's your tween or your teen being the backup plan for Saturday night, that's a great time to put away your own stuff and focus on them.
That's right. Get the pizza and just move along.
Yeah.
Okay, good question here from a parent. How do you set time limits and monitor time? And should you look at your kid's phone or read their messages? Her child is 15.
Yeah, I wouldn't read a 15-year-old's messages unless it was life or death. Like unless I really was thinking my kid was at grave risk of harm, if I was concerned about a substance issue, an eating disorder, self-harm, something like that, and they weren't telling me anything, and I needed to get that inpatient bed and I needed to like find the text or the post where they made that, like if I thought there was a good chance that it was life or death, I would look at their text. If not, I wouldn't read a 15-year-old's text. It's a pretty invasive thing to do. Think about if they read your texts. That's why we don't share Apple IDs in my home. Like, I don't want my kid reading my texts either, my emails either, right? Like, there's a lot of reasons not to do that. Talking to them though, and letting them know what your concerns are is absolutely important. Letting them know, or taking their phones at night, letting them know they can't text overnight. Talking to them, if you see like a kid crying or upset or really, profoundly upset by a text, definitely like letting them know, hey, I'm giving you space. I see that you're really upset, but just so you know, like, I'm here, right? I've got you. And just being there for them, and also letting them know that even if they're in a situation where they've maybe done something that they wish they hadn't done, like sent a picture of themselves that is too revealing, or gotten on an app that you told them not to get on, right? Like, what if your kid did get on a dating app and you told them like, absolutely not, you're not 18, and then they did, and maybe they met somebody and now they're in a relationship with someone, or have had like an encounter with someone who's older. You would still want to know that. You would still be supportive of them. That's the thing. It's like that you would still go pick your kid up, even if they had used substances and you told them not to. You would still go get them. You wouldn't be like, well, I don't know, you broke the rules, right? So you might be upset that they broke the rules, but your most important concern is always going to be them and their safety. And they do need to know that as teenagers, because sometimes they will get so scared that you'll take away their phone. And so it's really important to not, to try to project as much calm as possible.
I think that's such a good point, Devora. It's like those of us who always say to our kids, I will come get you no matter what. This is the digital version of that, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Speaking of that, what if kids do get in a sticky wicket? If they run across, for example, hate speech, I'm pretty sure that that's happening a lot. Do you have some advice about what parents should advise their kids to do?
Don't share it. Like, you can report it to school or to the local police, but don't just share it on your own social, because you're amplifying that harm. You're hurting someone else's reputation, especially if someone has shared that. And maybe we don't want to do that. We might be angry at them and disappointed in them, but especially with a kid, we don't want to make them go viral for those reasons. It's definitely good to report it. And a lot of schools do have anonymous reporting if we need that, or you can bring it to show someone if you don't want to share it, because you don't want to be part of sending it and transmitting it. You bring your phone and show it to someone and then erase it off your own phone. And if you know someone who shared something more questionable, like hate speech is really clearly like not okay, but there are times where people have shared things that are questionable. Sometimes you can just reach out directly to that person. So like 2 or 3 times I've had friends vent on Facebook something that I thought could hurt them professionally later, and they might not have realized it in the moment because they were so upset, or they might not be as good at settings. And so they might not have realized how many people could see. And I've just called them up and been like, oh my gosh, I think you should take that down. That's what friends do, right? And I hope if any of my friends saw me post something that they thought would be like better if I didn't post, that they would just call me instead of like spreading it around. Can you believe this person did that? And so another example I'll give is I knew someone in my community who had already gotten a scholarship into college. He was a senior, great kid. He posted something about some like tutoring available that sounded a little bit like academic dishonesty. It kind of sounded like a paper writing service. And I'm sure this kid could have written A papers for other kids, but you know what? That's exactly the kind of thing that will get you booted out of high school or college. And I think that's what it was, but I wasn't sure. There was plausible deniability. And I called him up and I was like, because I had his number because we knew each other. And I called him up and I just said, I think you should change that. It sounds like a paper writing service. I'm sure you mean a legit tutoring service, but you should change that. And just so you know, like I taught college, like if the place that gave you the scholarship where you're going next year, like sees that could be it for you. And he was like, thanks so much. We never spoke of it again. He changed the ad. And I still don't know fully the intentions, but in that case, there was enough plausible deniability. There was enough opportunity for me to be like, I'm sure that's not what you intend. I'm sure what you mean is you'll help them with their papers. And he changed it. And that's, again, like, why would I go spread that around? Why would I send that? Like, people do things like send that to the school. Don't be that person, right? Like be the person that helps someone learn and do better as much as it's possible. And if someone is threatening harm, report to the authorities and be safe, of course. But this was not a situation where I felt like my community is under threat because this kid is like, offering to like write papers for other kids, but his future was at threat.
That's true. So Devorah, just quickly before people go off, we have a couple questions about your text number. Some people are getting a message that says the keyword is not recognized. Is that a timing issue?
I don't know. It should be working. Screens to 66866 isn't working.
Well, a couple people have said they were having some
You know what?
trouble.
Chat me your email if you don't mind on the Zoom, and I'll just
Oh,
grab it.
here's somebody said it works. So I
Okay.
think, okay, good. Just wanted to be sure because people really want to do that.
I definitely, and if you have no other way to do it, you can also Google my Substack. It's Substack Devorah Heitner. So that would be the other way to go. It's called
Okay.
Parenting Screenwise Kids.
She has a great newsletter. The Substack's fantastic. Highly recommend it. Devorah is very generous about sharing links to other books and happenings. So again, you're a wonderful networker. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm reading a lot of good stuff right now. And I feel like even yesterday, there was a great article in the Washington Post by an LA writer about being a Gen X mom, raising a Gen Z kid. I can share that with you all in my next newsletter. I'll probably share it. But I loved it. And it was saying like, let's embrace these Gen Z kids. They're awesome. And yes, they've been through a lot with this pandemic, but they're really socially active. They're doing great activism, like Catlin Savato in Chicago, who I showed at the beginning, is a school activist working on getting the police out of Chicago public high schools. Like, this kid's a leader. So she says she doesn't know where the last 2 years have gone. I was like, dude, the last 2 years you've been doing, activism to make high school a safer place for kids. Like, I know what you've been doing. But I think so many of our kids, like this girl who is a leader in her Discord, as much as I was a little concerned for her, I was also impressed.
Yeah.
Right. So I think we really want to ask our kids, like, what are you seeing out there? What are your friends doing? And just to come back to the theme of friends versus followers, I really want to emphasize this. A friend is someone who shows up for you and who you show up for. Most of us can count those people on one hand in a sort of a deep way. And if your kid has one, they're okay. Right. So one friend is enough. If your kid doesn't have one and they want one and it's important to them, like, you can work with the school counselor and, look around in the community and try to help them identify a friend and find a friend and make a friend. And that may take time, but your kid does not need 50 friends or 500 friends or 50,000 friends. And no one has 50 reciprocal relationships or 50,000. So it's so important to recognize that difference between friends and followers, and understand that a friend is there for you and you're there for them. You're genuinely happy when that friend gets good news and genuinely concerned for them if they're having a rough time. And that's mutual. And that's what a friend is. And a follower is someone who thinks your content is cool and they've checked a box, right? And that's a very different thing.
That is wonderful advice. Oprah Winfrey says she has 3 friends.
Exactly.
Exactly. Well, Devorah, do you have time for one last question?
Yes, I'm happy to answer one last
Okay.
question.
This is one I know that you get asked all the time, but this is sort of an interesting question. When do you suggest getting a kid a phone who struggles with controlling devices and gets distracted when doing homework or other activities?
I think that's a kid who might, quote unquote, need a phone, but maybe need a phone for less time during the day. Or maybe you could start with one of the sort of baby phones, like your Pinwheel or your Gab, or one of these phones that only texts. Maybe they don't need a phone with like a full browser. But you can certainly get that kid a phone if they need to be able to make their own plans, but maybe they don't need 24/7 access to that phone. Maybe it gets checked in when they're doing homework. Maybe they don't even bring it to school. If you know your kid's going to get suspended from school for having their phone out in class, it depends. I mean, if your kid's taking BART to Muni to 6 buses, maybe they need a phone to go to school. My kid walks across the street. He doesn't bring his phone. He can get his phone after school. Right. So it kind of depends on your kid and your situation and what your aftercare is and what your kid's responsibilities are, but they may not need a phone all the time.
All right. Well, Devorah, Dr. Heitner, this has been wonderful. I especially loved your final comments. Do you have a last word for us before we say goodnight?
Ask your kid what they see, ask your kid what they see other folks doing with social media or texting that they love. Or if you're really brave, ask them if you have any tech habits they want you to work on. But ask them what they see out there. Like, you want to know your kid's discernment. Do you have a friend who's always on their phone and never looks up? Do you have a friend who's really funny on social? Like, it would be great to hear kind of what they think of it all. Like, what's kind of great about TikTok? What's, awful about group texts, right? You want to hear their take on stuff versus our take, right? Because our take might be like, TikTok is this or group texts are that. but really ask them what they think and really listen and just take that information in. You don't need to even, give them your take in return, but just learning from your kids about their social world is going to be a huge help to you in supporting them and being empathetic to them.
Oh, such good advice, Deborah. Thank you so much for everything tonight. Parents, caregivers, educators, thank you for being on with us tonight. Highly recommend Dr. Heitner's book, Screenwise. Pick up a copy, and we will be sure to bring her back when the new book appears. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Deborah Heitner, for the wonderful information tonight. Look at all those emojis. We love that. That's the best part
Thank
about
you.
technology. Thank you, everybody. Take care, and we hope to see you again soon. Good night.